the world held its breath. In early February 2025, a seismic event shook the geopolitical landscape. Former US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin engaged in a lengthy phone call. This wasn't just any call, it was their first known conversation since Trump reassumed office. Lasting nearly 90 minutes, it was deemed highly productive by sources close to both leaders. For a world weary of conflict, it offered a glimmer of hope. The world waited with bated breath for the aftershocks of this momentous conversation. While the complete transcript of the Trump-Putin call remains confidential, snippets emerged, each word dissected and analyzed for its deeper meaning. Trump described the conversation as warm. This adjective carried significant weight in US-Russia relations. It suggested a willingness to engage in dialogue. Putin was more measured in his public statements. Moscow viewed the call as a pivotal event. It signified a new chapter in US-Russia relations. This hinted at a potential reset. The key takeaway was a shared desire for peace in Ukraine. Both leaders agreed to work closely to achieve this goal. This commitment could be a game changer. It suggested a potential shift from the proxy war. The question remained, were these pronouncements of peace mere rhetoric? Only time would tell if these words would translate into action. The world held its breath, hoping for the best but bracing for the worst. One of the most intriguing revelations from the Trump-Putin call was the former US president's expressed interest in mediating the Ukraine conflict. This unexpected development took many by surprise. Trump, known for his unpredictable foreign policy decisions, seemed an unlikely candidate for the role of peacemaker. Skepticism abounded. Critics pointed to Trump's history of transactional diplomacy, questioning his ability to act as an impartial mediator. His past praise for Putin and his seemingly cozy relationship with the Russian leader further fueled doubts about his true intentions. Could he be trusted to represent Ukraine's interests fairly at the negotiating table? Despite the skepticism, some saw a glimmer of hope in Trump's offer. His unconventional approach, they argued, could be the key to unlocking the stalemate. Unburdened by diplomatic protocol and with a penchant for deal-making, Trump might be able to achieve what others had failed to do: bring Putin to the negotiating table in good faith. The possibility of a face-to-face meeting between Trump and Putin was also floated. Saudi Arabia emerged as a potential location for this high-stakes summit. The Saudis, with their close ties to both the US and Russia, were seen as ideal hosts for such a sensitive encounter. However, the road to peace, if it existed at all, was likely to be long and arduous. The Trump-Putin call reverberated through the corridors of power in Washington, particularly within the Pentagon. The long-held belief that Ukraine could reclaim all the territory it had lost since 2014, including Crimea, was being reassessed. The prevailing view now acknowledged the grim reality: achieving this goal militarily was unrealistic and would only prolong the bloodshed. This strategic shift signaled a potential recalibration of US foreign policy. The focus seemed to be shifting away from direct involvement in European conflicts, with a greater emphasis on containing China's growing influence. This approach, dubbed Fortress America by some, prioritized securing US borders and deterring conflict in the Pacific. The implications for Europe and NATO were significant. The alliance, formed during the Cold War to counter Soviet aggression, was facing a new reality. With the US seemingly less willing to act as Europe's primary security guarantor, European NATO members were being urged to assume greater responsibility for regional defense. This shift in US posture, while understandable given its global commitments, raised concerns among Eastern European nations. Countries like Poland and the Baltic states, sharing borders with Russia and harboring deep-seated fears of Russian expansionism, felt increasingly vulnerable. The fear was that a less engaged US could embolden Putin, making further Russian aggression more likely. The Trump-Putin call placed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in an unenviable position. Caught between his country's need for Western support and the shifting geopolitical landscape, he faced an uphill battle. While he publicly maintained his commitment to liberating all Ukrainian territory, the reality on the ground was far more complex. Zelensky's immediate challenge was to secure continued military and financial aid from his Western allies, particularly the United States. However, with the US signaling a potential drawdown of its involvement, he was forced to look elsewhere for support. European nations, already grappling with their own economic woes, became his primary hope. This reliance on European aid, however, came with its own set of challenges. The European Union, while united in its condemnation of Russian aggression, was not a monolithic entity. Internal divisions remained, particularly regarding the level of military and financial support each member state was willing to provide. Despite the mounting pressure, Zelensky remained defiant. He vowed to strengthen Ukraine's military, recognizing that his country's survival depended on its ability to defend itself. Whether he could rally enough international support to achieve this goal, however, remained an open question. Section 6. Europe's Balancing Act. The Trump-Putin phone call sent shockwaves through the European Union, exposing the bloc's vulnerabilities and testing its unity. With the United States signaling a potential shift in its security commitments, the onus of containing the fallout from the Ukraine conflict seemed to be falling squarely on Europe's shoulders. The prospect of a more assertive Russia, coupled with a potentially less engaged United States, presented a daunting challenge for the EU. The bloc, already grappling with internal divisions over a range of issues, was now faced with the prospect of assuming a greater role in managing its own security. The economic implications were also significant. The ongoing conflict had already taken a toll on European economies, with soaring energy prices and disrupted supply chains. The prospect of a protracted conflict, with the EU bearing the brunt of the financial burden, was a cause for concern among European leaders. Despite the challenges, the EU remained steadfast in its support for Ukraine. The bloc condemned Russia's aggression in no uncertain terms and imposed a series of sanctions on Moscow. However, these measures had yet to deter Putin, and the question of how to effectively counter Russian aggression remained a subject of intense debate within the EU. Section 7. The Global Chessboard. The ramifications of the Trump-Putin phone call extended far beyond the immediate crisis in Ukraine. It signaled a potential realignment of global power, with the United States seemingly reassessing its role as the world's policeman and other actors, such as China, waiting in the wings. The call highlighted the increasingly multipolar nature of the international system. With the US seemingly turning inward, other powers, such as China and Russia, were seeking to fill the void. This competition for influence played out on multiple fronts, from the battlefields of Ukraine to the halls of the United Nations. The conflict in Ukraine had also exposed the limitations of the existing international order. The United Nations, designed in the aftermath of World War II to prevent future conflicts, seemed powerless to stop the bloodshed. This failure raised questions about the organization's relevance in the 21st century and the need for reform. The Trump-Putin call, therefore, marked a turning point in international relations. It underscored the need for a new framework for global governance, one that reflected the realities of a multipolar world and could effectively address the challenges of the 21st century. Section 8. A World Watching. The world watched with a mixture of hope and trepidation as the aftershocks of the Trump-Putin phone call continued to reverberate. The stakes were high, not just for Ukraine and its immediate neighbors, but for the entire international community. The call served as a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of global affairs. Events in one corner of the world, such as the conflict in Ukraine, had the potential to destabilize entire regions and trigger a cascade of unintended consequences. The international community, therefore, had a vested interest in a peaceful resolution to the crisis. The alternative, a protracted conflict that could escalate into a wider war, was too horrific to contemplate. The Trump-Putin call, despite the uncertainties it generated, offered a glimmer of hope. It represented a rare opportunity for dialogue and diplomacy at a time when both were desperately needed. Section 9. The Unfolding Future. The Trump-Putin phone call marked the beginning of a new chapter in global geopolitics, one characterized by uncertainty and shifting alliances. The ultimate outcome of this realignment remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The world was watching, and the stakes had never been higher. The coming months and years would be crucial. Would the tentative steps towards dialogue translate into concrete action? Would the international community rise to the challenge of forging a new framework for global security? The answers to these questions would shape the future of international relations for generations to come. The world held its breath, hoping for the best but bracing for the challenges that lay ahead.